What's the best I told you so moment? I was in freight. I delivered a pallet that was supposed to have 750 pieces. It looked a little short, so I asked the customer to count it. He refused 3 times after I explained to him if it was short they are going to deny your claim. He said don't worry. I said okay, noted it on the paperwork that he refused to count. He signed it. 2 weeks later he called the customer service representative to report the shortage, make a claim. The customer service representative called me, asked did I remember it. I said yep, read the notes. She said oh, he refused to count it. Claim denied, thanks bye. Lol. Ex-boss, who I was not fond of, had a vehicle he wanted to sell. He met someone who wanted to make payments on a used private party but take possession when they made the first payment. I told him not to do it. I said it was almost certain they will crash the car, and then just stop paying, and hell be left with a damaged car and no money. He told me I was dumb and went ahead with the deal. Okay. Whatever you say. For a couple months things were good and he was pretty smug. Then he comes in one day and tells me to research what happens if the above scenario happens, and the car was in a tow yard collecting fees. He wanted to know if he was responsible for the fees. I didn't even look up. Yup. If you want the car back you are. In the late 80s, I worked for my mill as a regional manager of her business. I worked very long hours for 500 WK. At some point, I told her that I deserved a raise. She asked me how much I thought that I deserved and I replied that she couldn't replace me for less than 1000 WK. She responded that she was sure that she could, so I said, fine, show me. She had trouble finding someone and finally had to pay the 1000. But after 2 weeks, he was totally incapable of doing what I did, so she had to split it into 2 regions and hire a second guy at 1000 WK. After 6 months, she discovered that they teamed up to embezzle about 15,000. Of course, she never acknowledged to anyone, especially not me, that I was right and she fucked up badly. I told my ex-wife's new husband that she was a cheater and would do it to him. He said she wouldn't. Forward 5 years, and they're divorced. He tells me she cheated several times for long periods. He tells me he wished he'd listened. As a teacher, telling the head principal at my school that the way they were abusing the alternate assessment program to boost standardized test scores was not just a huge burden on teachers but also illegal and likely to attract the scrutiny of the State Department of Education. He handed me a shitty assignment for the next year. I quit, and he ended up having to take that assignment teaching 16 kids with emotional disorders across 3 grade levels in one classroom. For the first month and a half of the school year BC they couldn't find anybody to take my place. I heard later that year that they came down hard on him for the scheme he'd concocted and ended up shutting down the alternative assessment program altogether. Told you so, DL. My roommate at the time always refused to take his keys whenever he left the house despite me telling him not to do that, relying on the fact that I always had mine. Our shifts ended around the same time, so we would usually come home together. One day whilst we were both out I had to go back to my parents' house, which was a couple hours away. As I was pulling up to their drive, I get a call from him, stranded in the rain, outside our place without his keys. I told him that I wouldn't be returning until tomorrow and that there was nothing I could do. He ended up staying over at one of our friends' houses, but since then he's never left the house without his keys. When I was 13 years old I found out my brother was selling drugs out of my parents' house. He used to tell them he was giving away McDonald's coupons that he got from working the drive-thru. We lived in a very nice neighborhood and I knew the influx of cars would attract police attention. After asking them to stop several times, I finally caved and told my parents. I was literally in tears because I felt guilty snitching on him but felt like I had no other choice because he was going to ruin his life. When I told my parents, they accused me of being jealous of him for having better grades in school and called me a liar. He was able to continue on for 2 years before finally getting caught. Our home was raided and he was on the 5 o'clock news that evening. My mother watched and sobbed, and I couldn't help but say I told you so. What could been an easy conversation ended in federal charges and several $100,000 in lawyer fees. When my aunt accused me of stealing her bag, I was devastated. Despite my tearful protests, she searched through my personal belongings, including my suitcase. However, when they moved house, her bag was found there all along. Family friend's truck was making a grinding noise from the brakes. Told him to drive something else to go hunting. Got a call the next day because he drove it 2 hours and then his brakes stopped working. He ended up needing calipers on top of the pads and rotors he would have originally needed. Told ex I was passing a kidney stone and needed to go to the ER urgent care. She told me to suck it up, and that it was just a bit of man's flu. Despite the pain, my anger had me drive her and myself to the urgent care, get a CT scan, and have the doctor tell me that it was a 5mm kidney stone halfway to my bladder. The look on her face when he confirmed that I was right was worth the pain and agony. When I was in high school 15 years ago during a basketball game, the coach pulled me out and berated me for not boxing out the opponent for a rebound. I did box her out and I knew it, so I talked back to him. We really got into it. That really ticked him off, so I didn't go back in the rest of the game. The next Monday at school, he pulled me into his office and said he watched the game film over the weekend and apologized because I did indeed box her out. Booked a flight to Bangkok with a canceling insurance, and almost all of my friends laughed. Why'd I spend extra money on such thing? They weren't laughing. March 2020. I was a contractor managing stormwater ponds. Happy to field questions on the topic. Cattails are usually bad because they grow so aggressively they'll clog inflow-outflow pipes and take up the flood storage volume. Also often are a monoculture with little ecological value. I had a manager I supervised who kept saying, "We don't have to sub that out to some company. I can rent an excavator and get all the cattails out, roots and all." He was a sketchy mechanic sort of character. Always had a MacGyver solution, always was double-dipping with work equipment. I finally approved his scheme to rent a Mini-X. Guess who gets a Tim? I fucked up FaceTime 15 minutes later. Me. I drive across the state to get on site and see he's submerged the excavator in the pond and ran it so water sucked up the intake. We had to daisy chain 2 F350s to the tow truck to tow the fucking thing 6 feet. He ended up buying it from the rental place, and repairing it, and flipping it. My dad had a rule that if he worked on the car, we had to be with him, use the manual, and help. He gave me the manual. The manual said it was the relay. I told him that. He said I read it wrong and didn't follow the if this then this correctly. We replaced the battery, it didn't start. We replaced the starter. It didn't work. We replaced alternator, it didn't work. We went to the repair shop, they replaced the relay, it worked. I loved my dad. I knew a bit more about cars and other household stuff than most girls. But Mom and I still have a laugh over that story and in the clutch, which is a whole other story. One time my mom and I were at Walmart and we spotted this woman who looked a lot like my aunt returning a TV. She told me to go get her attention and I said no, that's not my aunt. She said I know my sister and proceeded to yell, "Hey fat woman," and this woman turned and glared. When my younger brother fell through the ice while crossing a creek when we were kids around 11 and 9, it was only slightly higher than knee-deep on us and slow-moving, so not a high risk of drowning. However, a very uncomfortable 12-mile walk back to the house in 45°F weather. I told him the ice was too thin to cross there, and we could cross maybe 300 feet upstream where it was ankle-deep water that was still frozen pretty solid, but I wasn't the boss of him. 4 steps later and he's up to his armpits because he landed on his butt on the creek bed. What made it better was the entire winding walk home he thought he would be in big trouble with my mom. However, one look at the waddling, pitiful mess, and Mom broke out in laughter as she helped him out of the clothes. It gets funnier. He was mad that she wasn't mad, and was shouting about how it's not funny and why isn't he in trouble. Isn't he grounded or something? Which leads to Mom running out of breath because she's laughing so hard now. He ends up storming to his room, without being sent there. Dad was setting up one of those CRT rear projection TVs in the living room. I knew that the cable wasn't coming through since he had the wrong channel on, so I went up to tell him and he started to yell at me to get out of the living room. I came back an hour later to see him still struggling with it. I walked up, changed the channel and walked away. He was really mad that I got it to work.